Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Zoe Januzzi. I work as the U.S. Palestine Activism Program Coordinator at the American Friends Service Committee, and I'm one of the editors of Displaced in Gaza, Stories from the Gaza Genocide. I'm here today joined by Norma and Yusuf. Norma Hashim is generously joining us tonight from Malaysia. She's been involved in advocacy and relief work for Palestine since the 2008 attacks on Gaza. She's co-edited 3 other books with Yusuf, and in 2022, she founded the Hashim Sani Center for Palestine Studies at the University of Malaysia to address the need for Palestinian research and knowledge. And Yusuf Al-Jamal is my dear colleague at AFSC, where he serves as the Gaza coordinator. He's joining us today from Turkey, where he lives with some of his family after finishing his PhD. Yusuf is from Gaza and did his master's degree studies at the University of Malaysia. He has contributed to, with writings or editing skills, to more books than I can name today, including If I Must Die, an anthology of poetry and prose by the assassinated Palestinian poet and academic Dr. Rafat Al-Arir. We're here today to talk about Displaced in Gaza, an anthology published by Haymarket Books. The book contains 27 personal narratives of life in Gaza, including repeated displacement. And the narratives were collected in May of 2024. I want to say that you can purchase the book directly on Haymarket's website, but it would be great if you could also visit your local bookstore and request that they stock it if you don't find it. And sales of the book benefit We Are Not Numbers, an organization that helps mentor and support young Palestinian writers in telling their stories to resist the flattening and dehumanization of Palestinians in the ways that they're often spoken about. And so I want to begin today. Yusuf and Norma, you have an incredible history together. Tell me more about how you met and the beginning of your storytelling work.
So, thank you very much, Zoe, for the introduction, and thank you, Norma, for being here, and thank you to Haymarket for launching Displaced in Gaza today. My relationship with Norma and Malaysia goes back to 2012 and 13. That's when I co-translated the Prisoners' Diaries, Palestinian Voices from the Israeli Gulag with my colleague, the late Dr. Raed Qadura, who was assassinated along with 53 members of his family on November 20 in Gaza, 2024. The book was translated into multiple languages, and of course, we worked with local journalists at the time to get these stories of Palestinian prisoners who were released from Israeli jails in 2011. And then we sent the translation to Norma, who worked on editing the book and publishing it in Malaysia and later translating it into many languages. And I ended up studying in Malaysia. A year later, Norma welcomed me, and she's been there since the beginning, and she's been very supportive of Palestinian students there, including myself and Rafat and others. We worked on other books, Dreaming of Freedom, Palestinian Child Prisoners Speak, that I translated also from Arabic into English, and Norma published both in the US and in Malaysia, and in Palestine, in fact, in Arabic. And finally, we also worked on A Shared Struggle, Stories of Palestinian Irish Hunger Strikers. I co-edited the book along with Norma and Danny Morrison in Belfast, in North Ireland. We're also printing, like more books of these books because some of them got sold out, such as A Shared Struggle. Yeah, so I lived in Malaysia for 2 years, as I mentioned, and I did my master's there. And this is how my relationship with Norma strengthened over the years. She also co-founded the Hashim Sani library in Gaza, where hundreds of students met to discuss books and politics and writings. That's where Dr. Rafat Al organized many of his talks and workshops and webinars on creative writing in Gaza. And finally, she founded the Hashim Sani Center for Palestinian Studies at the University of Malaya, which collaborated with the AFSC to publish this place in Gaza that we're launching today. Norma just told me a couple of days ago that there is a Hindi, English, Urdu, and hopefully a Malay translation. So we're going to launch and publish the Hindi, English, and Urdu versions of the book next month in India.
That's incredible. Norma, can you share a little bit about what it was like meeting Yusuf for the first time?
Yeah, actually, I've been. I joined this NGO called Viva Palestina Malaysia during the 2008 attacks on Gaza, because they needed a treasurer, someone who handled the finances. And I thought it was just that, but it turns out that if you handle the finances, you have to speak to someone every day in Gaza. So it ended up that I was like talking to someone all the time, asking about how the projects were getting done and what were they doing, and send me photos and things like that. And in the end, I got to know a lot of people in Gaza because we did a lot of projects. So over the years, in 2012, someone at the Center for Political and Development Studies in Gaza, where Yusuf was actually, were you doing working there? Maybe
Yes.
as a young student. Someone who was a director there, he contacted me and said, I have collected interviews with prisoners that had been released in the Gilad Shalit exchange. The Palestinians call it the promise of the promise of the free people to release them. And he said, I have all these stories and I want people to know about them. And I was very puzzled. I had not heard of Palestinian prisoners, they are political prisoners. Nobody knows about them. And in the year 2011, 2012, I think nobody outside of Palestine would realize that this was one of the biggest things from the occupation that affected almost every Palestinian family. So he sent me these interviews, and the word prisoner then became very personal because the stories that they gave, the interviews that they gave, reflected each person. Everyone had a different story about his family, and you realize that everyone has a face. They have a family, they had dreams, and many of these stories were so heartbreaking. So he asked me if I could publish the stories in a book. And I said, I don't know anything about publishing because I'm an accountant. and, and then I thought about it and I realized that if I didn't do something, maybe nobody would read these stories. So that's how I decided to say yes a couple of months later. And I just had to find the ways to get it out. And it turned out to be the first of many, many books. And I think it has raised a lot of awareness about this issue of Palestinian prisoners in Israel. Yeah, because there are no photos or anything about prison there, so nobody would know otherwise. So that's how I met Yusuf. He was a very young. Uh, were you a graduate at the time? No, I'm not sure. I think you just graduated, right?
Yeah, I was doing my master's.
He was so young, and he and the late Raed Kadura, they were the ones that translated the stories from Arabic to English for me. And then, when I read them, I kind of like got them edited and I found a publisher. And after that, more and more people picked it up in their own countries. And that's how we ended up with a French version, a Turkish version. It got published in the UK, sold very well. So that was just the start of this journey with Yusuf. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that history, and helps to build a foundation for this project that this project benefits from. And so I want to talk a little bit more. The story collection in Displaced in Gaza was sponsored by the Hashim Sani Center, and Yusuf, with family in Gaza, you're very aware of the difficulties of getting stories out of Gaza and the realities of displacement. And so how did you collect the 27 stories in the book? How did you find people who were willing to tell their stories?
So, as you said, because of heavy Israeli bombardment and destruction all over the Gaza Strip, it was very difficult to find people. But there also were people who sheltered at schools from all over the Gaza Strip. For example, there was a school in Sayarat that had people from all over the Gaza Strip who lost their homes and they ended up there. They took shelter there. And of course, Israel did not leave them alone there. The school was bombed a couple of times. Um, so the interviews were collected from these schools. Uh, and we conducted the interviews. We collaborated with local journalists to conduct the interviews with people from different parts of the Gaza Strip, from Gaza City, from Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun in the north, Jabalia, all the way to Rafah. And many of them were sheltering at that school. We talked to, mothers, students, teachers, so people from all walks of life who ended up displaced because Israel destroyed their homes or forced them to move to the south of Gaza, in Nusayrat refugee camp in particular. And then the stories were collected in Arabic. I translated these stories into English, and then we started a process of editing these stories at the AFSC. The AFSC, the Palestine Activism Programs team, edited the stories in English, and we got them to a very good level to be published. We made them publishable. We worked on the language. We fact checked. We did all the things that editors do to make sure that the narrative is smooth and correct. Um, because again, these are not like professional writers. People just speaking about their agony and displacement and losing family members. So we made sure that the edits do not impact the essence of the story, but rather just to make the language and the grammar more suitable. And then we decided to publish them in Malaysia initially. So the book was published in Malaysia. I was always in touch with Norma during this time, and we found a publisher in Malaysia and we published the book there. We also launched the book, I believe, in November last year in Malaysia at a book festival in Shah Alam in Kuala Lumpur. Um, and now we're working on a Malay translation.
Thanks, Yusuf. I wanna ask a little bit more about the story collection. As an editor, some of the stories seemed very cathartic. Many of the stories are about the worst moments in people's lives. But for other stories, it seemed that some details of the stories were too hard to share. That people were holding back. They were found these parts of their lives to be too horrible to even include in their stories. And so I'm curious if the two of you could tell me a little bit more about the difficulties of telling stories in the midst of genocide. Yusuf,
Actually,
you've shared your story before.
yeah, I wanted to say that, because I do relief work. So since October 7, I have been doing daily projects in Gaza. And I noticed that, after 6 months, I think it was all just about numbers of people killed. And I realized that because I had covered Gaza in relief for many attacks before that in 2008 and 2012, 2014. After 6 months of this genocide, I realized that this was something else. This was just so bad. And I was, when in a genocide, I realized the end game was an erasure of the people, not just the people, but their stories and,
Yes.
their identities. Uh, so because I'm not from Gaza, but on the outside, and I could see that everything was about numbers. Oh, up to then it was like 10,000 people had been killed, or that's what they estimated. Um, and because Yusuf and I have this history of doing stories, first-hand narratives. So it was in uh, April, I think, I messaged Yusuf and I said to him, that was 6 months after the genocide. And I messaged him and said, I think we should start collecting stories of people because, you need to humanize them, because they have been so dehumanized, the way that the bombings have gone on. I mean, yesterday I was like so horrified to read that Trump had, when at the Knesset, he had said, like boasted that America makes the best weapons in the world. And he was saying that, oh, Netanyahu, you have used them well. I mean, what is this? I mean, that is so dehumanizing, in the extreme. What do you think happens when you use them well? People like Yusuf's family have been killed. Many people have like suffered so much. Children, thousands of them have been amputated, and children have become orphans. So it's so dehumanizing, that I knew that these stories are so important because you need to show them as people with dreams. In some of the stories in the book, like there was a story of a girl who said, I might be selling chips one day today, but one day I'll be a doctor. So this is what was important to me, to get the personal stories down, despite the fact that there's an ongoing genocide. Yeah.
Based on my experience, like interviewing different people from Palestine throughout the years, I think it's the personal experience and like the timing of the interview that um, tells if a person is more open to tell their story or not. For example, there are people who, because of the shock of losing their family members or their homes or being displaced, who might be less willing to share their stories with the outside world. There are people who feel like, there is no point if we share these stories.
Yeah.
Especially like today, after 2 years of genocide, like people in Gaza have lost hope in the world that they're going to end this. So if we go to the street today and like try to interview people, I'm sure we would get a lot of negative responses from people who do not want to talk about their misery, who feel like there is no point to share these stories. Um, so the timing is important, and of course there are people who are less willing to share their experiences and their stories if you go to them soon after a tragedy happens or displacement happens, or if they lose a family member, or if they lose their homes. They're still in the shock, so it takes time for people to process these stories and share them and tell them to the outside world. But at the same time, there are there are also people who are natural storytellers. So you wouldn't struggle. You don't have to ask extra questions to tell you the story. You would get it immediately. Sometimes you have to ask extra questions, follow-up questions, to make sure that the entire story is told and every aspect of it is covered. So I think it's also the journalists on the ground who would ask extra questions, clarifying questions until the full story is told. We have to think about the circumstances of these people, and that's why Norma decided also to try to help them financially. So every family that we interviewed was given an amount of money, and recently a food basket. I mean, this is not going to change their lives, but at the end of the day, it's not just we're asking them to tell their stories, we're also trying to help them with something meaningful, although it's never enough compared with their own, loss of their family members and friends and neighborhoods, and in fact, collective memory in Gaza. I think, yeah, it differs from one person to another. If you go to a grandmother, for example, a grandmother would be a natural storyteller, like Ayman, that we have her story in the book. She's surrounded by her grandchildren, and I'm sure her grandchildren enjoy her storytelling every day. So it wasn't difficult to get the story out of Omayman, but sometimes with like younger people, they're not used to interviews and things like that. We have to be very patient and we have to ask extra questions and to have a conversation and to break the ice so that they feel more comfortable to tell us stories. And of course, we had to also, tell them who we are and why we're doing this, so that they need to have the information, because during a genocide, people feel very like very suspicious about people asking them questions or interviewing them for their own safety, and this is totally you know right. And so we had to give them the information, the background information of this project, what are we going to do with the stories, etc., etc.
Thank you, Norma and Yusuf, both for sharing the necessity of telling Palestinian stories instead of relying on numbers, and also Yusuf for sharing about the difficulty of collecting stories. I mean, for these people, there's not a moment to rest for Palestinians in Gaza, to collect your thoughts and your feelings, and to reflect on what you've been through, and to be ready to tell that story. That moment may never come. I want to talk a little bit more about storytelling and the tradition of Palestinian storytelling, because, as you say, Yusuf, some people are natural born storytellers, and some people also rely on the mentorship and the support of people like Dr. Rafat Al-Arir, who I know was a friend and mentor to you. And you come from a long line of Palestinian storytelling, Yusuf, and I want to hear more about the importance of storytelling to you. You've spoken a bit about your history in bringing stories from Gaza and from Palestine to the world, but why do you see this book and these stories as important in this moment?
Rifat used to always repeat to quote an African proverb, until lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And again, I see this book, Displacing Gaza, as a continuation of this legacy, continuation of storytelling tradition that was started by the late Dr. Rafat Al-Arir. I think it's very important that we tell these stories, we share these stories, we get people to just like talk about their frustration, their dreams and aspirations, their hopes, and their agony at the same time. Um, because I see this as an act of resistance. Uh,
Yes.
it's a way to face Israel's ongoing genocide and brutality that aims at dehumanizing Palestinians. So, telling stories means that Palestinians are not numbers, are not statistics in international or UN reports. They are people, and they have stories, and they have aspirations, and they have worries, and a lot of people relate to personal stories. These stories could be read anywhere in the world. They could be translated into many languages, and they could also be turned into cultural productions in different ways. So that's why we get these personal stories from people and try to convey them to the outside world. Because I also see storytelling as a means of changing the narrative on Palestine, and the narrative has been shifting globally in a way we haven't seen before. And I think this is because people in Gaza continue to share their stories every day on social media in different languages. And that's why Israel continues to target Palestinian journalists who allow these people to share their stories. So storytelling is very important in this battle for public opinion. And I see Palestine is winning this battle for public opinion. And thanks to storytelling, this is happening. And I have to say, sorry, it took us a genocide for people to listen to us, to our stories.
Norma, the book was published first in Malaysia, and you mentioned earlier the book fair where it premiered. And I know that the desire to hear Palestinian stories it goes far beyond the United States, where this book is published now. And so I want to hear more about the response that you got to the initial publishing of this book. We all here believe in the power of storytelling, but there's also a lot of people out there who appreciate the stories. Yeah.
Yes, but actually, you know, when I did the books, starting with the three prisoner books, I felt that it was more important that it was read in the West because, you know, it was the Western governments that are funding the occupation.
Yes.
In Malaysia, I mean, almost everyone is pro-Palestine anyway. So they do listen and they do buy the books. But in terms of impact, I felt that I needed, you know, it to be read in the West. And that's why I did my best to get it published in the UK and other countries as well. Yeah. So we do have people now more interested in hearing the stories in Malaysia because you know since the last 2 years the world has changed entirely. You know that everyone's suddenly woken up, and before that, in Malaysia, it was actually just about people are very generous here, so it was about more like relief work. Although you know advocacy is actually very important, but for Malaysia, we do not have diplomatic relations with Israel, and there's no, you know, so it's something that what we do doesn't affect directly the occupation, not really, except for BDS. But I felt that it was so important to reach, you know, the West because the occupation is not just the occupation of Palestinian lands, the occupation of the American mind, and without American weapons, you wouldn't have this genocide. So to me, you know, it's the most important thing is to get that the change made there in the West, which is happening now. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to share about the importance of storytelling to you, Norma?
Yes, because when you tell stories, I mean, people can relate to them so much better. Everyone likes the story. I mean, you'll see that every time there's a personal element to a story, like even on social media, people people listen to that, they watch it, and then they yeah, it gets more impact, more likes. People listen more rather than just rather flat things which are just like posters. But people want to hear personal stories. Yeah.
Thank you. And we're lucky, as Yusa said earlier, that people are willing to share their stories with us, even despite such inaction from our governments. So I want to talk a little bit more about the production of the book. Yusuf, you were talking earlier about the process of translation and editing, and I think translation is an art form. Like it requires a lot of nuance and deep knowledge of language and creativity, and I imagine it must be difficult to convey the feelings and undertones in such personal stories as you translate from Arabic to English. So I want to hear about what challenged you or surprised you in that process, Yusuf.
You know, Arabic is a very metaphorical language, and I think once you translate a text into another language, it loses some of its meaning and its sense in a way. And that's why I think the job of the translator, besides translating the text, is to keep this essence, this meaning, very close to the original text as much as possible. And I mean, this is not always easy, but it's doable. And we have to look at the like cultural references and in each language and try to convey the meaning. And sometimes you find a proverb that has an equivalent in English, so it would be easy to translate. But sometimes it doesn't have an equivalent, and probably you have to add a note so that people understand and the meaning here, or try to understand it, because sometimes it cannot be the exact same meaning. Um, so yeah, Arabic is very rich, very metaphorical, and you know there are also people who use slang language, and you try to figure out how to turn this into also a meaningful sentence, keeping in mind the original context of that sentence. There are also people from different cultural backgrounds, different parts of Gaza, who speak like different accents, and they have also different stories. And I think it's also the job of the translator to make sure that all these stories read coherent and smooth throughout the book. Um, the references, the entire book is about displacement, so this makes it easy to make it coherent. But also the representation of different people from different communities, different ages. As I said, we've seen teachers, students, we have children. We interviewed children in the book. There was a child who started a trampoline business to help his family at an UNRWA school. So yes, although it's about displacement, about Gaza, but it also covers different aspects, and we have different stories of people who share different experiences. So this is again not easy for the translator, but it comes with the practice. It also comes with deep understanding of culture, language. Like local people and their preferences and what they really mean by this and that. Um, so of course we always have, as you know, at the FSC we have people working on the ground in Palestine and in Gaza. The FSC has been working in Palestine, so as an organization we have the experience. I myself come from Gaza, so um, I understand. Sometimes I have to ask, follow-up questions, but like being from there was very helpful. These are my people. These are our stories. In fact, I know some of them personally, like Ayman um, uh, is a woman I know personally. She's been visiting my even my grandmother's house, and then my aunt after my grandmother passed away, and then my mom after my aunt passed away, and then after my mom left Gaza, she's been still visiting my siblings who survived Israel's bombardment. So when the relationship is very personal, I think it helps also the translator, because you understand a lot of things, a lot of cultural references that other people might need to do extra research to get.
Thank you, Yusuf. We're incredibly grateful and lucky to have you at the American Friends Service Committee and on this book project. Norma, you and I are both editors of this book, and I want to say that I often found it incredibly surreal and sometimes off-putting, adjusting commas and grammatical sentence structure in these stories that tell of such heartbreak. And my work felt really insignificant in the face of these stories, which often include the worst moments in people's lives, and insignificant in the face of all the work that people around the world, including AFSC, American Friends Service Committee, are putting in to move us towards justice. And at the same time, I believe really deeply in the power of storytelling. And part of that work means ensuring that the stories that we're telling are accessible to audiences. So I was curious about your experience editing these stories, and if you could tell us a little bit more about the challenges and joys of sitting with these stories for extended periods of time.
Um, because I do relief work and I actually do them every day. I have a project every day to either provide food or water or tents in Gaza. And throughout this 2 years, it's just been like, we've had to adjust according to how it's been. It's changed. Um, like in the north, it was really, really hard. Even like 3 months into the genocide, by January, it was like there was like a famine in the north already. People were not eating. They were just eating like maybe just dates once or twice a day. It was so. So when I read the stories, I can connect them to what I see myself on the ground in terms of the hardship and the suffering. But the stories provided another context to it, how the lives are affected in not just ways that us as relief workers, would just be thinking sometimes that, okay, I need to provide food, I need to provide water in tents. But when you hear the stories, then, you realize that there's so much more that they've lost. It's more than just needing to eat and drink. it's like having lost members of their family and basically lose everything, isn't it? Because they've lost their homes, their livelihoods as well. Even today, I hear stories of like how do people like start moving forward now? They're moving back to their homes in the north, but what is there? There's nothing left. Um, I do ask as a because I'm used to stories that even when I'm doing relief work, I always ask for people's stories, or I always want to know a bit more about them rather than just just providing the food. You also want to listen, because that helps you in terms of empathy, that humanizes the people that you're helping. So these stories help me to see another aspect of the genocide. So that was important to me. Yeah.
Thank you, Norma. Yeah, I'm really grateful that you brought that up. I know so AFSC has a weekly action hour for Palestine that I welcome anybody on this call to join. It's every Friday at noon Eastern. And a couple of Fridays ago, Yusuf and our guests were having a conversation about displacement and reminding people. I mean, displacement is in the title of this book, but displacement is much more than just packing things into a suitcase and leaving your home. It's the things that you leave behind. It's the destruction of your house, the walls that you grew up with, and the love that's there, and the people in your life, the killing of the people in your life. And all of that and more is contained in these 27 stories. So this book it's now out in the world, and we're already seeing a lot of interest in these stories, and the humanizing of Palestinians in Gaza. And ultimately, part of why we put this book together is not only to educate, to share these stories, but also to move people to action. Both of you have mentioned the ways in which the United States is complicit and a participant in the genocide in Gaza and other Western countries. And so, Norma, you've said that that people in the West need to hear these stories. But I want to put the question to both of you: how do you want people to engage with this book? What do you imagine in your wildest dreams? What programs do you imagine people putting together with the book? What can people do to help us get this book out into the world?
I want people who read the book to turn what they learn about Gaza, the displacement of people in Gaza, into rage, and then turn this rage into political action. Because as we mentioned earlier, it wasn't easy for people to share their stories, especially people who have gone through a lot in terms of displacement and losing their family members, in terms of starvation and dehumanization, and just like the fact that they had to live under bombardment for 2 years, thinking that they might be the next target, is in and of itself very difficult to imagine from a psychological point of view. So we got these stories. It wasn't easy, like working with people in Gaza and like trying to get stories out of Gaza is not easy. But of course, it's nothing compared to the lives of the Palestinian people themselves who have been displaced. Some of the people in the book have been displaced over 30 times. We got these stories out in the hope that um, personalizing the suffering of people in Gaza will push people outside Gaza to act and bring about change. There will be, and there should be no genocide two in Gaza, but genocide one happened, and this is the moment we need to turn this human tragedy into a relief and a means of healing for the Palestinian people, for a better future where Palestinians can enjoy equal rights, where Palestinians are not dehumanized. And this is the moment. I mean, if you look at the streets all over the world, the streets are with Palestinians. Time for governments, and we hope that these stories and people who share these stories will be able to push their governments to act now, because like we have waited for 2 years, and the situation in Gaza is another catastrophe. Gaza was reduced into rubble, and we have lost tens of thousands of people, at least, who were directly killed by Israel's war machine. So this is the moment. We hope that people who read the stories will form an understanding of the reality on the ground that will push them to be more fierce when they talk to their representatives, to be more fearless too when they talk to their politicians, and also to share these stories with other people. So we managed to win the hearts and minds of many people, but there are also people uh, who still continue, supporting the genocide, or people who are just silent. So we need to educate these people using these stories, and again, like translating them into different languages, with turning the book into an audio book. All of these things help us reach more audiences, and hopefully change the hearts and minds of people in favor of supporting Palestinian rights.
Yeah. To me, um, collecting the stories is important because we need to preserve the evidence as well, because now that attempts are made to erase evidence during genocide, usually to rewrite history or keep witnesses silent. As you know, when the uh, journalist Saleh Al Jafari, the moment he was killed, Instagram deleted his account. So it means that there are people who are still trying to erase evidence of the genocide. So these stories are important, and I hope more people will write, more books will come out about people's experiences in this genocide. Not just our book, but many, many more stories are brought out, because we need to keep them in print. We need to keep a record of everything that happened. So our book is just the beginning, I hope. I hope there'll be many more. Yeah.
May it come to pass. I want to give space now for both of you to share anything else that you'd like to give to audiences about this book, your participation working on it, and the importance of Displaced in Gaza.
I think if you read the book, you will feel like so much rage and sadness after learning about what these 27 people have gone through in Gaza. And again, this was in May 2024. Uh, um, people have, I mean, people have seen much worse since then. Uh, there are more stories. I believe there are 2 million stories out of Gaza, at least. Everyone in Gaza is a story. This is just a small fraction of
Yes.
what the experience of displacement and genocide in Gaza looks like. So, of course, as Norma said, we need more books. We need more people. Like, we need to give people the platform to share their stories. Everyone in Gaza has a story. I mean, Rifat always said that even before the genocide. And it's very true now that everyone in Gaza has a story. Everyone who experienced this genocide, people who did not survive have a story, and people who survived have a story. And I cannot tell which one is more tragic, because a lot of people in Gaza say those who get killed survive, and those who survive never survive, because they have to live with the pain and the agony of the memory of and people and places that they knew that are no longer there. So yes, this is an invitation for people to work on more stories, and again to amplify Palestinian voices out of Gaza. I have seen some projects. Some of them are good. I've also seen projects like a book on Gaza that doesn't include any Palestinian from Gaza. We do not need more of that. We need less of that. We need to give Palestinians in Gaza the platform. Palestinians in Gaza can speak for themselves. As we've seen in this small fraction of stories, we have teachers, engineers, uh, a highly educated population that has lost 2 school years because of the genocide, but still people can always speak for themselves, and they can share their stories. So yes, please make sure that you reach everyone in Gaza. If you have a friend in Gaza, write their story or give them the platform to write their own story. If you can turn this book into an audiobook, I remember in the past, Norma also turned some of the books into Braille. Uh, we have audiobook, we have different translations, and again, we can have dozens and dozens of books and stories of people. Everyone in Gaza who lived throughout the genocide can write a memoir
Yeah.
about their life, because this is not like a week or two or a month, as Norma said. We're talking about 2 years. I just cannot imagine the pain and the stress and the fear people have gone throughout these 2 years. And this, like, everyone in Gaza can put this fear, this experience, this hope, this aspiration into a book. So please, like, this is an again invitation for publishers, people who have access to streaming or websites. Share stories out of Gaza. And as Norma said, this is important. I mean, we've been doing this at the FSC since 1948. The documentation, the FSC has an archive of Gaza. We continue this legacy of documenting these stories of people, and I'm sad to say that we've been doing this for 77 years, and still Palestinian people haven't seen justice.
Yeah. For me, getting the book out just makes people realize that it's not just an injustice, there's a human cost to all this. There's a human cost to all this. So that's what personal stories are for, to know how it affects people and to teach people some empathy, um, to have some empathy for the Palestinians.
Thank you both. Yeah. I want to emphasize that there are more than 2 million stories in Gaza, and that especially for those of us who live in the United States, or who live in countries where politicians are providing political cover, weapons, diplomatic cover to Israel, it allows it to continue genocide. That it is our responsibility to share not just these stories in the book, but to try and help people understand that there is no one Palestinian story, that there are more than 2 million stories in Gaza, that these stories are truthful to the people who told them and are not representative of every experience. And the more that we can help share Palestinian stories with our friends, our family, our media, our news stations, the closer we can move towards justice for Palestinians and for us all. Norma, you spoke about the occupation of the American mind, and I think the justice for Palestinians is so entangled with so many other justice struggles, and these stories also help us understand that the empathy that we have for the storytellers and the ways in which, the small ways, maybe in which we can maybe relate to parts of the stories, though these are realities that we'll never understand. I know there's a question in the chat about how Palestinians in Gaza are receiving projects like this, and feel about these storytelling projects. I know many journalists in Gaza continue to tell Palestinian stories and to try and get information out in the face of explicit targeting of journalists and killing of colleagues. There are new journalists, people who weren't storytellers before October 7th and are now forced into that role. But as you said earlier, Yusuf, I know that there's also that a lot of people in Gaza feel a similar sense of disappointment as a lot of advocates around the world do, that the sharing of these stories can only do so much, and that it hasn't been able to bring justice and freedom and liberation to Palestine. Can you talk a little bit about how people in Gaza see this project similar to this?
it's a mixed feeling. So there are people who feel very much disappointed, and they see that there is no point behind sharing stories with the outside world. But also, if we look at the experience of Palestinians who survived the Nakba of 1948, and at the time, much of that history was oral, and those Palestinians are no longer there. I mean, if you look at Gaza today, similar situation where about 83,000 people in total, including people who are still under the rubble of their homes, have been killed, and they're gone with their stories. So it's important to document these stories. Oral history is very important, but it has to be supported by the written word, and like publishing a book like this will help us document these stories. And as I said, we also try to support people on the ground, not just like ask them to tell their stories, that we care about them. These are our people, and we'll try to help them in any possible way. And in fact, giving them the platform to tell their stories is, this is how we see it, is a means of helping them, because at the end of the day, our goal is to change the narrative on Palestine in favor of the Palestinian people, and this will give more justice, more equality to the Palestinian people in general, or as a collective. So yes, so helping them, and like they see that we care about them, this encourages them to tell their stories and share their stories with us, and to be more open about sharing these stories. And I understand the frustration that some people have, because it's after 2 years of genocide. It's also after 77 years of colonization. Multiple generations of Palestinians have been tortured, imprisoned, um, exiled, killed, injured. It's the same story in a way or another that has been taking place for 77 years. So I understand the frustration that some people have. But again, trying to explain the background story of the project and trying to help people directly helped us get some people to share their stories. There are also people, when you live in a place like Gaza under siege, there are people who are uh, more encouraged to speak to the outside world that they have been deprived of, in a way, the world that exists beyond the waters of the Mediterranean and the walls at the Gaza Egypt border, or the fence and the walls at the Israel Gaza borders. So people need to want to share their stories with the outside world, um, until they can travel the world freely and share these stories. So this is a means to allow people to travel throughout the world without traveling physically. Um, and again, it's a mix, that it's this and that. There are people who feel like more optimistic or more willing to share. It's also a question of safety. I believe some people are very careful not to share their stories, because a lot of journalists were killed. A lot of families of journalists were killed by Israel, just because these journalists reported the stories of Gaza to the outside world. And I've seen this with the podcast I do. Some of the participants I invite, they ask me this safety question: is it safe to talk about Gaza while in Gaza? And it's totally understandable with the censorship and the blackouts and the crackdown on Palestinians everywhere, just because they shared their stories. And many people, in fact, paid a heavy price for sharing their stories, like Rafat Larrir. They lost their lives and their families were targeted, and this is all like understandable to me.
Thank you, Yusuf. Yeah, I know you and I both think a lot about collective memory, and this book is a very real way to preserve parts of that and to preserve Palestinian stories. Um, a lot of entire families have been killed, and it's hard to imagine all of those stories, the death of all of those stories. And I also want to say that buying this book is a very real way to support the growth of Palestinian stories, and the profits from the book go to We Are Not Numbers. and this project that helps young Palestinians tell their stories and grow more Palestinian storytellers. I'm seeing another question in the chat about a new collaboration that the American Friends Service Committee is doing with Visualizing Palestine, another organization, a partner organization that does a lot of work to preserve and tell Palestinian stories. And so I am the person's curious about the differences in between storytelling in that project. We've released a new exhibit that you can download and showcase around the world, and we can put that information in the chat. But this project is slightly different, although there's overlap. There's a lot of quotes from this book that will be shown in that exhibit. So Norma, Yusuf, the differences between different types of storytelling projects. I know we often talk in this movement about the importance of lots of different work and how things go hand in hand. So Visualizing Palestine does use a lot more numbers, and these can be really powerful as well. And of course, visuals, illustrations, and pictures that also help to tell Palestinian stories.
Yeah, I think, yes, as you mentioned, Zoe, is the elements of visuals and pictures and sometimes statistics and numbers that are used in a very creative way, using all these posters and designs that make them more visible and more like easy to understand. That's how visualizing Palestine works, in addition to including quotes. So like personalizing the story, in addition to having all these like supportive statistics and numbers and visuals. While in Displaced in Gaza, we have people just sharing their stories, like personal details of their lives during the genocide. And as I said, people from different backgrounds, and we have their pictures. It's very like small picture of this person sharing their story. This is my story. This is what happened to me, and this is what I hope for. Um, we have a story of a mother who became a mother and a father for her children who were orphaned. And at the same time, and again, they were orphaned because Israel killed their father. They were displaced in the south. And she shares the agony and the fear and the stress of, having to look after her children after their father was killed. And I mean, a lot of people in Gaza can relate to this experience today. Uh, a lot of their 20,000 um, orphans in Gaza. Uh, there are, tens of thousands of children who lost at least one parent. So this is, very representative of the Gaza experience today. And we try to just get people without interference whatsoever uh, in this particular book to share their stories and just like, sometimes share their frustrations versus having visuals and like statistics that help people understand the context. Again, I see these like two things complementing each other because we need the personal aspect, we also need evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Norma, do you have anything to add about how different aspects of storytelling can work together?
Actually, I do get a lot of people sending me stories, people in Gaza, because I have a lot of friends there. And actually, I do find that people do like to tell their stories, but sometimes they'll say, "Oh, don't share this, with anyone, or don't share this on social media." But they will tell me about, I don't know, just sometimes everyday things like um, moving back to their home, uh, finding that some tanks had destroyed their staircase, so they can't go upstairs to where the apartment was. Yeah, I mean, I get that personal insight into their lives, um, which I would, which I think it's nice for people to know. Well, nice, not nice, but you just tend to see them as people like your neighbors, you know. And I think that's how, if people realize that, you know, especially in America, that, you know, Palestinians are just as worthy as Israelis, their lives are just as important, all this wouldn't happen.
Thank
So
you.
it's these stories are important that way.
Yeah. Thank you, Norma. Yeah, there's a lot. I think there's a pretty universal quality of wanting to be seen and to be known, um,
Yeah.
and um, and this book can, yeah, helps to do that. The personal narratives in this book. I think was just shared in the chat the link for our collaboration with Visualizing Palestine that brings together the more visual aspects of storytelling and some incredibly powerful quotes from Displaced in Gaza and other writings that AFSC has put out, including Light in Gaza, which is also through Haymarket Books. So you can sign up to host the exhibit in your community. I'd also invite you to come to the action hours the AFSC puts together every Friday. It's a pretty incredible community. We'll have our 100th action hour for Palestine tomorrow. And so this is a routine commitment that people make to join us on Fridays and to hear more about Palestinian stories and to take action, including by calling our members of Congress and sharing Palestinian stories with people who maybe believe that there's only one Palestinian story, or who are used to or who participate in the flattening and the dehumanizing of Palestinians. Um, any last words before we wrap up today, Yusuf or Norma?
Um, I ask everyone on this call to get the book and to share it with their friends and community, because this is how we reach out to more people, and this is how we shift the narrative, and this is how we win hearts and minds. This is just a small fraction out of Gaza of the experience of people who lived through the genocide. I think it's important that we share these stories with people around us. If you're a teacher at a school, please share it with your students. If you're teaching at a university, also share it with your students. If you are a healthcare worker, please share these stories with your coworkers. I mean, there are different ways. If you go to church, or you go to a mosque or a synagogue, just share these stories with your surroundings, with your friends, with your community, um, because the Palestinian people have been dehumanized at unprecedented levels since the beginning of the genocide, and the use of language such as human animals require these stories. And we have to debunk this narrative and to show people in Gaza as people. Um, and people who have aspirations and frustrations at the same time. We're not perfect, we're not a perfect nation, and people shouldn't expect us to be like superheroes who say positive things. No, we cares a lot during the genocide. People who are starved, they think about survival. And again, there are people who are willing to share their stories, there are people who are less willing to share their stories, and no one can blame anybody in Gaza what they do today, after 2 years of genocide. But again, it's our responsibility to share these stories, uh, to allow this book to travel to different communities, and maybe host more book launches and book readings. Um, if you are part of a book club, you can also share it with your friends in the club. And I know it's a very sad book to read, but we have to read it. This is the reality.
Yeah.
And our governments allowed this genocide to happen, and not just happen, to last for 2 years. So this is the
Yes.
reality that we're dealing with, and people have to see it. I've seen horrible pictures coming out of Gaza today of bodies of people Israel delivered to the Palestinian Red Crescent today through the Red Cross, people who were literally executed while they were blindfolded and handcuffed. This is the reality. We cannot look away. And again, our tax dollar allowed this to happen. And so there is we shouldn't feel like shy to share these stories or ashamed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to read these stories and allow ourselves to be moved to fearless action, to anger, and to action. Norma, anything else to share today?
Uh, no, it's true, like what Yusuf said. Everyone should read the books and not just read this book, but read stories of Palestinians firsthand, firsthand narratives, um, and bring them and to platform Palestinian voices, because to hear them speaking, it may be just, is so important as well. Giving a voice where, it hasn't been offered before. That's why actually all these Instagram accounts of, has been actually quite useful on TikTok. People actually broadcasting their lives. I think that made it so human. That really humanized the people in Gaza. So that's important. We should recognize that and give them the platform to speak.
Thank you. Thank you both. A lot of important things shared in our conversation today. And so I invite everybody who's joining us now or in the future to go and get a copy of the book. Get 10, one for your library, one for your parents, for your siblings, for your coworkers, for your little bookshop, to hand to your neighbors. These stories deserve to be shared, and heard, and so do Palestinians not featured in this book. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Zoe, and thank you to
Thank you very
Haymarket.
much.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very late here. So, all right. I call it a day.